This episode of the Batify podcast is brought to you in partnership with ministryleague.com. We would love for more people to discover this show, so please rate and review us on iTunes or your podcast provider. Feel free to share on your social media, and please do subscribe. Enjoy. Welcome in to the Batify podcast. I'm Travis Creasy, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Ben Hayes. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great, Travis. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Unfortunately, my wife Whitney won't be joining us with us tonight. She's dealing with some neck and back issues, which is never any fun because that's connected to everything else.
It is.
But it'll be just myself and Ben Hayes. And we'll be talking about one of Ben's journeys in his life, one of his times in which God has shown up. And it's kind of interesting because we've done our own personal stories along with some camp folks this summer. And we're going to kind of wrap that up a little bit tonight, at least for this go around. But also it's a little bit different because what Ben's going to be talking about is 20 years.
Exactly.
So we get a little more perspective on that. You know, with Whitney and I, we're kind of a year out, a couple of months out. And so we're still trying to work through things. And, you know, obviously you don't ever get over things like what we're going to talk about, but you do gain perspective. And so I've been really looking forward to this opportunity to kind of go back and look at some things, and I was a little bit a part of it, had some experience with it, and
I think you were more than a little part of it.
Yeah, but you know, it'll be interesting to kind of go back and see the perspective from 20 years out.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know, I didn't kind of realize that until last week, and it just kind of, I started doing the math. I was like, wow, 20 years. To the day, September the 23rd. So about a week ago today, I guess.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah. I've been looking forward to it. I know that obviously with you doing counseling, ministering for several years now, we won't get into how long that's been. But,
wow.
You know, the things that you can bring out of it now that you are this far removed, I think will benefit folks who may be listening, and maybe people that our audience know that may be going through something similar in the moment might can help and reach out to them. So,
yeah, unfortunately, this kind of stuff happens way too often, and you know, people are constantly needing to deal with, you know, tragedy, and just like with you guys, your story was such that, you know, it will be gone through over and over and over again by folks in the future. So I think this is why this is I hope this is why this is a helpful podcast to folks.
So Ben, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking tonight, and we'll get this thing started.
All right. Well, about 20, like we said, 20 years ago, I had been in a relationship with a young lady. We were both pretty young. We met at camp and had dated. Both loved the Lord. She was probably stronger in that than I was, to be honest. But we did. We had a good relationship for a couple of years. And on September 23rd, 1999, she was on her way home from school, wasn't feeling well, and ended up having a car accident and took her life. So, you know, that was one of those things that I wasn't quite prepared for at that age. I'd had some loss, but it had been, you know, grandparents several years before, and a couple of people at church and things like that, but nothing that, was anything like this. And so it's just one of those tragedies that the whole community was sort of grieving over. We were at, you and I were at Freed-Hardeman at that point. And so, that community was there around us and things like that. And so, it's just one of those difficult moments that you just don't prepare for. You don't know what to do when it happens. And you go through a lot of different things when that happens. So her name is Tabitha Jean. Many people know her from our community and the Savannah, Tennessee community. She was a student at Hardin County High School. Anybody listening to the podcast is familiar with Hardin County. Went to Maywood Christian Camp. I know there'll be a few that are familiar with that. And you and I both had been at camp with her. And
that happened. That happened. People said, people did. What were some things that were good and comforted you, or maybe you saw comforted those that were dealing with it, the family? Maybe even those of us that went to camp with her and knew her.
Well, I think there's a lot of time. I mean, it's obviously helpful anytime you have a scenario like this to have the backing and the relationship with a church family, and she was a very godly person. We had the my church family, her church family, the Freed-Hardeman family, the Maywood family. I mean, there was just a lot of encouragement and a lot of, it's one of those things where I guess it was the first time I'd ever been to a funeral of somebody that was so young. She was 17. And, like just the outpouring of love and care and people just coming by. I know a lot of people struggle with, what to say. And I think sometimes people, sometimes the saying of things is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
When we start talking, we end up messing things up. I think we can go back to the book of Job and see that. But, just being there, just coming by, and just the hordes of people who came through for visitation. The church at Savannah was just absolutely packed full of people. And, just to know that there was a community of people, both, I'm sure, believers and non-believers, but just, I think the vast majority of that would have been, believers who were there just to support the family. And I'm sure a lot of people didn't even know, her particularly or us particularly, but just because it was somebody that was young, it was like, we need to be there to support. And I just think that's such a church thing to do. It's such a human thing to do. Weep with and mourn with those who mourn, and rejoice with those who rejoice. And so,
I can just remember, it was really kind of the first time where I had seen the impact of someone. I had friends that I went to school with who had died while we were in school, but to see the Christian impact that one person could have, and obviously not one person, she impacted others impacted others, and just that ripple effect. I think that was the first time, sitting in that church and going through that service of, whoa, this person at a young age had such a tremendous impact for good, and you mentioned that in our little survey that we do, that there was a ripple effect, and you may want to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, even, like you said, you just have that ripple where, all these people come because, and she was a great influence. And I think that influence has lived on in many ways, both in my life and in others. But then, I was working with youth group at the time, and there were several young people that when that happened, decided to give their life to Christ as a result of it. And, they kind of saw, and I think as we all do, we kind of come face to face with our own mortality. And when that happens, you start, asking that question, hey, am I ready if something happened to me? And so I think that was there, obviously, her good influence and who she was made that possible too. And I think, just to think that one person and for young people to understand that, at 17 you can have an impact on people. You can have an impact for good, absolutely. I guess on the flip side, you can have an impact for bad. But I think that's a powerful message about that. Is any of you young people listening, you do have an influence on people your age and people older than you and people younger than you.
There's a questioning, and I think it's a good question, of purpose and meaning in life. And, of course, we pertain and hold to the idea that there is a God, there is a creator, that we've all been created in the image of God. We all have a purpose. But, we talked about a little bit going to some of the emotions that you had. And obviously there are a tremendous range of emotion. But one you mentioned is anger. In our little survey, and we talk about anger, we talk about emotions. We're angry with God. How do you feel like God deals with anger? Is it okay to be angry with God?
Yeah, and I think that's a tricky thing for a lot of people. And I don't know, I obviously don't have all the answers, but I guess the way that I've sort of reasoned this out is there were a lot of people that got angry with God in the Bible. And some of them were very righteous people. Some had almost downright arguments with God in the Old Testament. And there are people that we would look at, like Moses or Abraham or Job, these guys that got angry with God, and yet God still, looked at them as righteous and good people. And I think, what we have to understand is God made our emotions. He gave us the capability of being happy and sad and angry, and anger in and of itself is not sinful. It's what we do with it, and how we act when we have it. But I think God, I say this to people all the time, and I don't think I'm misrepresenting anything, but God's big enough to handle our anger. He's big enough to handle our sadness. And I think the key is that we talk to him about it. Hey, I'm angry with you. I'm angry with you, and I'm angry with this scenario, and I'm angry with, these people, and whatever it may be. I think that's what he wants us to do, is not to be angry and turn away from him, but be angry and speak to him. And when we do, he helps us, work that out and put that in its proper place. But I think it's important to kind of encounter all the emotions. There's going to be times when you're angry. There's going to be times when you're sad. There's going to be times when you are even happy. And sometimes that's the toughest one after a tragedy is it okay for me to be happy? Is it okay for me to laugh? Is it okay for me to enjoy life again? A lot of people who survive, or, they either, whether they're with them or they were just somebody that was so loved, a part of the family, that you kind of feel guilty moving on. And I think it's important for us to know, hey, look, all those emotions and thoughts are normal, and to laugh about the good memories, and to cry about the good memories, and to be angry about the time that you're going to lose. I think those are all normal things that we go through.
And acknowledging that God has the answers. You can be angry. You can some things. I think I mentioned this in another podcast, that David said to God, that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, and yet here's the man after God's own heart who expresses that. But I think going to God with our anger is us saying, we know you're in charge.
Right.
We're acknowledging your authority over this, your sovereignty. But, maybe even in those emotions, can you tell us a little bit how maybe you feel either 20 years ago or even now? How does God speak to you through this event?
Well, there's a lot of interesting things about when this happened, and even to now. I was taking a class at the time by Mark Crowell, who was a teacher at Freed, and the class was on death and dying. I think that was the name of the class, Death and Dying. And like I said, I'd never really experienced a lot of that before, so I just thought, as a minister at the time, I hadn't even thought about becoming a counselor at any point, other than as a minister counseling people. But I had, so I took this class just to sort of be prepared for those things, and had no idea that, in the middle of this semester, I would have such a significant loss. And so, I'm not, I'm against, people and statements like, God did this or God did this for a reason, on events, but I do think God prepares us for things. And I feel like, that class was a preparation moment for me. And so the night it happened, another thing that night was just, I remember going home and just, crying and praying with my parents. And I remember going in my room, and just somehow my Bible sort of, honestly, I don't remember like looking for or searching for. So a lot of things are a blur, but I can remember just all of a sudden some verses just being there. Philippians 4:7 was one of those that I remember somebody mentioned. Just one of those comforting passages, just about the peace that passes understanding. And then passages in Revelation where, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord, and blessed in the sight of the Lord are the death of his holy ones, and things like that. That not that God does these things or wants these things, but that he still sees blessings and can bring blessings in the midst of tragedy. And so I can just remember those things kind of speaking to me, God speaking to me in that way. I can remember, just in the comfort of friends and the people who come around. And even, 20 years later, I think that's the thing I see him at work in is, I probably would have never become a counselor if it wasn't for that. I went, the guy who taught that class was a counselor. And so I ended up going to him for some counseling sessions. And in the midst of that, I realized, hey, God's helping me through this event, and therefore I need to help other people through similar things. And so, we talk about, Lonnie Jones and I help on a ropes course, and we talk a lot about one of the takeaways is anything you get through kind of qualifies you to help other people through.
I can remember thinking, wow, look at this, the impact and the ripple effect in that moment. And, I can't tell you a single thing that anybody came and said to you. Obviously I didn't hear all of it, but even when I was there with you,
probably don't either.
But I can remember people who were there, and I guess more than anything, I've told my students, and I'm not a counselor by any means, and probably should keep my mouth shut more often, but, simply being available, at a visitation or in the hospital, or, don't feel like you have to go and have the right words all the time.
And honestly, I think the words are the least important thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think so many times we do start, like with Job's friends, we start messing it up when we start saying anything, and just go in and say, hey, I love you. I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you. I'm here if you need to talk, And I think, another thing that I've found, and I remember this from that class, it's kind of funny how I remember some of the things from the class, because I don't remember a lot of things from most classes through the years. But I do remember, the idea of that when people go through things like this, they want to talk about the person. And we feel so weird, as people, if we're not the one going through it, we feel weird bringing them up, because when I bring them up, they cry. So I'm upsetting them. And it's really not that. It's, they're crying because they remember them, but they really don't want other people to forget them either. And so I think there's a point in that where, when you remember a story about somebody, or you think of a good memory or something funny about them, I try to do this with folks at church now, and I think that's something that's sort of carried on is, I still talk about things. I've got a lady that her husband, when he passed away, they gave me some of his kayak and stuff, and I carry one of his knives on me when I go to the woods. And when I hiked the part of the Appalachian Trail and did some of those things, I carried that with me, and I would snap a picture of it and send it to her and say, hey, Gary's walking with me today, and just as a way to say I hadn't forgot him. And I think that's, something that's important for people to know, that they're not the only ones remembering them. Because I think after weeks or months, you start that feeling.
That's pretty cool, because I tend to try and reframe and try to make things lighthearted. And I felt that before. Do I bring this person up? When is a good time? When is it okay to talk about this? And someone who's been in that awkward situation, that I appreciate that. So you can teach an old dog new tricks. So if no one else gets anything out of this, I've gotten some out of it. So I appreciate it, Ben. But just want to take a moment as we get ready to ask the final question to our guests to encourage you, if you are in the market or looking to create your own podcast, to look at Anchor. That's what we use. As you listen, you may be thinking, if these two guys can do it, then anybody can, and that's absolutely true with Anchor. The best part is it's free. There's plenty of creation tools that allow you to record, edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. You can also contact and have your guests on from different locations or right there in the room with you. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you. It can be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. To end the podcast, I'll ask you a few fun questions. What is your emotional movie or TV moment?
Man, I couldn't really come up with one that's just absolutely the moment, but I think anything where you have some main character who is getting redemption or something where they overcome the odds, or, especially like if kids are going through something, and I love those movies, but man, they can just have those emotional impacts. Like, some of these newer movies that this Christian group has released, they've always got the feels to them. There's just something. They know how to touch on that emotional part, and just anything like that, man.
And you put on here. Anymore. You put on here, things make you emotional all day. And let me tell you, any guy that's out there listening to this who's maybe super macho and I don't cry, just wait till you get to your late 30s.
It'll happen.
And especially if you have children.
Yeah, I think the kids change it, man.
Oh, dude.
They just do.
Dude.
It's like
Rocky. I mean, I shed tears in Rocky. I watch A Football Life on the NFL Network, and I'm shedding tears because, hey, whatever.
Oh, let's talk about, anything that comes on Saturday morning with the, ESPN Game Day, when they share these stories of these
Tom
guys.
Rinaldi.
Tom
dirty
Rinaldi,
dog.
He will suck the life out of you.
You dirty dog.
But, yeah, that kind of stuff gets me.
All right, Ben, what song, and we've done carpool karaoke, CYC style, but what song causes your inner performer to unleash in the car? I've seen this happen before.
Yeah, there's probably quite a few of those. But I would say one of my favorites is Jesus Freak by DC Talk. I don't know why, but I just love
big
that
fat belly.
So just let's sing about John the Baptist and some guy on the street corner. But that one, of course, just about anything, the good, clean stuff that Aerosmith has. So I went from DC Talk to Aerosmith in 2 seconds, so that's pretty weird. But
all I can think about is you and I riding to Freed Hardeman and singing entire Diamond Rio albums.
That's true, and Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings,
exactly.
Pretty much any of those would fall into the same category.
None of this you will see on the CYC stage at any point.
That's probably true,
and it's a good thing. You should be very happy.
That's right.
Thanks for being with us on this episode of the Batify Podcast. Be sure to download the Ministry League app and get all of our sister podcasts, along with all sorts of great ministry material at facebook.com/Ministry League. Until next time, look for us at the same Batify time, same Batify channel.